Just southwest of central Austin, Texas, is the small town of Manchaca. Manchaca is the home of VFW Post 3377, which has quite a distinguishing feature. The F-4c Phantom II, delivered to the VFW by the U.S. Air Force Museum, served as a wild weasel during the back half of the Vietnam War. It concluded its service as a Texas Reserve aircraft and is now permanently on display for the locals of Manchaca. Well, it looks like it needs a new coat of paint. Let's fix that. I would like to introduce to you my Eagle project, Project Phantom. Before we can begin painting, we must remove any loose paint or mold that is currently on the aircraft. To do this, we use power washers and metal wire brushes to clean and brush the airframe. Unfortunately, we ran into issues removing the tail number and pilot name decals, requiring my father and myself to return the following day to prepare more for the beginning of the painting process. This was by far my favorite day of the project, as it was relaxing and very satisfying to watch the mold, old decals, and bad paint go away. Wait, hold on. We can't paint just yet, because when my father and I returned to remove the decals, something had happened. During the following week, after washing the plane, a film of dust had coated the aircraft, and it took us 2 days to remove the decals that couldn't be washed off. This was unplanned, but thankfully we had the extra days to clean it up before we started painting. What was planned though was sketching day. Sketching day gave us time to flesh out the adjusted camouflage, which consisted mainly of altering the tan shape on the port side fuselage. Finally, let's throw some paint on this thing. Painting was the longest part of the project, stretching over an entire 3-day weekend. Progress was slow at the beginning because, due to a lack of communication on my part, we only had 3 volunteers show up. That did not stop us from accomplishing a lot on day 1. Day 2 accomplished the most, with most spots on the aircraft receiving a coat of paint and some getting a second. This was thanks to the 10 people who arrived ready to paint. Thanks to our many volunteers, there was only a couple things left for day 3. Day 3 consisted of completing the second coat of paint on the rest of the aircraft, as well as painting the cockpit glass. The longest part of day 3 was taping off the cockpit for painting to ensure clean, straight lines that followed the curves of the glass. This did not take long because we once again had a great turnout of volunteers who were eager to complete their part of the project. And just like that, we have our new camo. Okay, but why the new camo? Well, up until a couple months before I began work on my project, I'd constructed my plan. First, I would find the correct colors to paint the aircraft. Then I would assemble a team and follow the camouflage that was currently on the aircraft. Then I would be done, keeping it simple. But then things changed. It all started when I was contacted by a retired Air Force and Naval captain named Alan Palmer. Alan, after graduating from East Tennessee University, attended the U.S. Air Force Officer Training School, officially commissioning as a second lieutenant in 1966. Alan began his career as a pilot flying 100 combat missions during Vietnam in the EB-66 light bomber. He was later assigned the F-4c Phantom II in the 67th Fighter Squadron, also known as the Wild Weasels. The 67th Fighter Squadron was made up of 36 unique F-4c Phantoms. These Phantoms, now designated as EF-4c Phantoms, were equipped with electronics allowing the aircraft to detect, locate, and identify enemy surface-to-air missile sites. Alan flew the very first EF-4c Wild Weasel mission over Vietnam and continued to go on 60 combat missions, destroying 6 enemy surface-to-air missile sites, as well as 7 anti-aircraft artillery installations. Alan was awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action, 4 Distinguished Flying Crosses with Combat 5 for heroism, and 11 air medals. Alan concluded his flight career in the F-14A Tomcat after being granted an inter-service transfer into the U.S. Navy. Leaving the armed services, Allen became the executive director at the San Diego Air and Space Museum, which is one of the top 5 air and space museums in the country. He continued to fund and help develop other museums, including the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum. Allen reached out to me giving his personal request to repaint the VFW's F-4 to its Vietnam-era paint scheme. In his request, he included several photos that he took of the exact jet I am working on, when he flew in the same squadron with it. He later told me that he had flown in this exact aircraft that lay in front of us. I eagerly accepted his proposal because in the coming months there was an event where the aviators, technicians, and ground crew were having a reunion, and I sought to honor their legacy by restoring the aircraft to its special paint scheme. If it was not for Allen Palmer, then I would have never learned so much about the rich history of this aircraft. To start converting the camouflage into the Vietnam-era paint scheme, we started by masking and painting the red line located on the tip of the vertical stabilizer and around the cockpit. This was quick and easy, and we called it a day and went home after only a couple hours of painting. Then we came back the next day to find this. I don't know exactly how it happened, but the red paint from only the top of the vertical stabilizer had dripped all the way down the tail, passing through all 4 colors, dripping onto the aircraft's elevators. This then meant that we had to come back the next day and repaint half the vertical stabilizer. Well, after we repainted the tail, we began masking off the white stripe and white border on the tail and canopy respectively. Thankfully, after we added the white, it did not drip or cause any further frustration. The next step was to add the pilot names, which we used stencils to keep the names neat. We also used Allen's provided photos to match our stencil to the correct font. Unfortunately, the stencils were not adhering well to the paint, so we manually had to fix some paint accidents. Then we began work on possibly the most stressful part of the details, the tail numbers. Doesn't seem too hard, right? Well, actually starting with the base code letters, it wasn't so bad. For these massive letters, we used poster paper to create large paper stencils. With these, we were able to then tape around the outside of the letters with masking tape. Now onto the aircraft serial numbers, and once again, the wind is back. You see, we had a friend design and create vinyl stencils for the various numbers and letters. Vinyl is extremely useful when it comes to securing onto a surface and holding during the painting process, but factor in the wind, and as soon as the vinyl sticks to itself, it's game over. We only ran into issues with the wind on the number 7, requiring us to go back and mask a little bit of it. But it took myself and my father 2 hours to place and mask one side of the tail numbers. For reference, we were supposed to finish all the decals and details that day, and we had already lost the whole morning to one thing. We quickly broke for lunch and got transfer tape, which helped immensely with placing the vinyl on the other side of the tail, taking us only 40 minutes. Once the hard part was over, we painted over the vinyl and tape and called it a day. The next day we focused on painting the slime lights, which are the infrared formation lights that were added to the F-4 when it became an EF-4c Phantom, as well as these special letters. The DDD and CC, located on the port side splitter vane, stands for Don's Dirty Dozen and Crew Chiefs. This was added to most of the EF-4Cs in the 67th Fighter Squadron to honor the ground crew and mechanics who worked on and around these aircraft. Another signature addition to these birds was the last 3 numbers of its serial number being painted on the nose wheel cover panel, highlighted in red. Now, let's get to the decals. Starting with the ejection seat warnings in the rescue arrow, these decals went on smoothly and quickly. Then the 4 Air Force stars and bars located on either side of the aft fuselage and on the top port side wing and bottom starboard wing. Sadly, these posed more of a challenge. When placing the decal over the pre-existing one, we had to make sure to be exact with its location because our new decal was only around an inch bigger on all sides than the pre-existing one. We quickly realized this when we pulled the transfer tape off of one of the decals, and you could still see a sliver of the old stars and bars under the new decal. We later fixed this by painting over the sliver. We did not run into any further issues with the stars and bars except for the starboard side underwing decal. This decal was centered on a line of rivets that quickly created air bubbles in our decal. Eventually, all the bubbles were removed by using a needle to poke small holes in the bubbles that could not be worked out by hand. And finally, the squadron-specific decals. On the starboard side, mounted on the intake, is the 67th Fighter Squadron Fighting Cocks decal. It went on smoothly and perfectly with no bubbles or painting needed. On the port side intake is the 18th Tactical Fighter Wing decal, which once again was on our side and was kind to us as this was the final decal for the plane. But that isn't the last thing, because my last little bit of history for you is a phrase that was mentioned by the pilots to the ground crew each time the plane was serviced. She always flies just a bit squirrely. I want to thank everyone who helped me with my Eagle project because I certainly could not have done it on my own. Here are the names of those who contributed in any way towards this amazing accomplishment. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching, and if you ever have the chance and you're in South Austin, Texas, be sure to stop by the VFW Post 3377.